Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. This week, we're talking about the shadow of deafness and gene key 43. This is going to be a fantastic dive into the process of involution as we look at this aspect of human genetic destiny. So I'm really excited to explore this topic this week with you. My name is John, here as always with Bella for this week's Lunar Alchemy. Hey Bella, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited about how much definition there is in the chart now, and that we have that 2343 that is both programming partners and the channel between the ajna and the throat. So it feels like, yeah, a lot of definition right now, a lot of influence from the outside, but in a cool way, because we have epiphanies in this specific gene key.
Yeah, I'm excited about hearing that, and can't wait to take a look at the charts. As in my own chart, I have so much definition in general, but I do not have either the 43rd or the 23rd gate, and my ajna is undefined. So this will be an interesting experience of influence for me, and I can't wait to get into this discussion because of the just how deeply we're getting into a process of to me it feels like evolution. Of course, I have the 34 as my purpose sphere, so to me everything feels like evolution. But after coming out of the last transit through the creative, here we are into transit of the breakthrough, and everything just feels like it's combining and moving us forward. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, do you want me to pull up the charts right away, or do we want to do a little bit around the 43 before? What feels best?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you have something on your mind about the 43? I'd be curious to hear where your focus is drawn to around this particular key, just because there's this particular, like what comes up for me immediately about this gene key is it's one of the few gene keys where the shadow is directly referenced as the key at each of the levels of this frequency of experience. So when at the shadow frequency, deafness to your inner voice is what's bringing in the experience. At the gift, deafness to the status quo is what's allowing for that inner rebel to come out. And at the Siddhic frequency, deafness to anything except the divine is what allows that state to become present within our world. So this quality of the gene key doesn't happen very often, where the actual focus of the shadow is in fact also the main key for each of the different states. So for me, this is a really interesting one, and I'd love to hear your insight about these types of things. And if that involves the transits too, cool.
Yeah, I feel, because we are in the first line, we're very soon coming into the second line of the 43, which means that we have been less than 24 hours. I still feel like I'm coming into the energy. I have the first gene key that we actually didn't do because we are meeting every week, and there is 6 days between the transits. So we were missing that first gene key. I feel like I'm still kind of processing that because it is my evolution. And the 43, I guess, for me, the 43, sometimes I haven't really felt like it is a Scorpio gate, because now so much is Scorpio. And I will share the charts just so that we have a reference. where we are in the charts. And so we see the sun is still in Scorpio here in the 43, but there is something with those gates before where it feels like even more like going into the darkness and all that. And I guess that the intensity is still here. Scorpio's intensity, the intensity is still here in the 43. It is that intense only hearing, your kind of your own process. And when we look at the body graph, when we have, you were saying, you're speaking, I heard you say the word destiny in the beginning. We have the code ring of destiny, which is that 34 and the 43. It's only two keys together. And it's individual circuitry. So it is kind of like it's immersed in its own process, and it doesn't hear what's on the outside. And for me, that is kind of beautiful, because it is about kind of your inner knowing, your own process, and the importance of that to be expressed. And we speak about the process of involution and evolution. So in the integration circuitry in the 34, we have the evolution, and then here we have the involution, consciousness, and we see all these gates that are defined. So it feels like, we have direct connection to that consciousness, and it's coming into form, it's dropping in here in that 43. And breakthrough is intense. In that sense, it is very much a Scorpio energy. It is the focus on that, and it needs also a time of relaxing, because we can't, the same way we can't force creativity, we can't force breakthrough. It's going to happen spontaneously. And I think that is an important thing with the 43, because the way that I think that we often behave is like we think that we can create the right environment or the right people for breakthrough. And there is something here where actually the way that consciousness comes into form, it's not something we really decide. It is spontaneous, and it requires also a bit of that void, that silence that you were speaking about.
That's
what comes to mind.
Yeah, you're speaking about everything that you're speaking about is pointing to all of these somewhat mystical aspects of our experience as human beings. When you look at the chart of where we are right now in the transit, and you see that direct line coming down the center, how interesting that here we are on the date of November 11th, the 1111, which is often termed as the master number of awakening. And when you're speaking about, so during the previous 5 to 6 days, the sun was in the transit through gate 1. And in the I Ching, this is heaven over heaven. And its title is the creative. Now, of course, in the gene keys, this relates to the shadow of entropy. And when we're looking at this, it talks about, what is the beginning of consciousness? The way that we can understand it, it begins with the Big Bang. And what happens in many of, particularly in the Western cultures, but across many, many cultures, there is an explosion of light in the universe. And so when we're looking at this process of becoming that it is to be a human being, oftentimes in our spiritually focused pathways that we are coming into, we're looking at, how do I get more light? How do I become more inspired? How do I become more efficient? How do I become more evolved? These questions are what are driving us. And one of the things that you're saying there, Bella, is that this involutionary process, this epiphany, is not something which of course is the Siddhic frequency for the shadow of deafness, epiphany. This is not something that we can generate inside ourselves. Like, we can't do something that's going to cause epiphany to happen. It doesn't happen through cause and effect. It's this spontaneous happening that is essentially a divine event. At the same time, here we are within a human body, is epiphany going to happen for us if we consistently engage in lower frequency experiences, if we take actions and make choices that cause our frequency to remain at a low level or go even lower? And I think we all know the answer to that is there's no way you can experience the divine if you're doing those things. So even if you have the capability of reaching the thoughts that say even low frequency is divine, you know, there's a difference between the embodiment of divinity and the sort of knowing of a concept about divinity. Those things are not the same. So, you know, we didn't do a lunar alchemy session on gate 1, but and I wanted to have a conversation with you about this, Bella, because I was contemplating this gate and searching for a transmission that could assist our human system with this process of the creative, the essentially the event that is light occurring in the universe. And while I'm thinking about this, I'm realizing there is nothing that you can do to make light happen. In fact, you know, throughout the discussion of that gene key, Richard Rudd talks about, you know, entropy is essentially the experience of not feeling that creative pulse within you, that creativity of life. And there's nothing you can do except wait. So there I was waiting through the entire transit until, you know, pretty much last night, you know, the evening, the very last day. And by the time I realized what we could actually do energetically, my body had to shut down and I had to rest. And interestingly, you know, you brought up Scorpio and wondering, okay, where does this gene key 43 fit in with the role of Scorpio, with the themes of Scorpio? I recognize that in order for light to exist, there must first be a deep and actively churning experience of darkness. And in our experience, we can look at the sort of what we are terming from a scientific standpoint as the emergence of the understanding of dark matter. This is matter that appears to have qualities of either mass or energy or movement of some kind, but it doesn't seem to carry any other qualities that we can point to that has a physical representation. And this is something that we can create an environment for within ourselves. And this is interestingly a very similar concept to how an epiphany occurs. Can we create an epiphany inside of us? No. Can we cultivate the environment that we are and that we are a part of to allow for this involution of divinity? Yes, absolutely. So, you know, it's really like, I just keep, my mind just keeps being blown by the perfection of the wisdom of these gene keys and how this transit around the mandala, each one literally leads into the next in such a specific and perfect way. I mean, it's really mind blowing to me that it is so profound in this way. And by the way, for our solar members, I will be posting that transmission for the shadow of entropy today, so you can see that in there as well. You can access that and use that along with today's transmission. They will work really cool together. So, feel free to do that. I'll send out an email once that is available. If you're
There is
watching on,
something oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I'm thinking back to this week and some of like the practical applications or expressions, and I can see attitude, because we know we can't force creativity, we know we can't force insight or epiphany. There is something where Richard Rudd often speaks about attitude being the difference between the shadow and the gift. And I can see with those transits we've been in, the 28 that has to do with purpose or purposelessness, and then the one that has to do with entropy or depression, and me having those very, very strongly in my chart in the evolution, which is the challenge, and then in the moon, which is very intense and emotional. And I can see that in those last maybe 6-7 days, I think I have even been deaf for another frequency than kind of the lower frequency. And not necessarily that I was attached to the lower frequency, but my process was just like that. And I said it in the live before with Ashley. I was waiting for my moon cycle, or I had pain from Friday on. And it's like, it's like the body says, okay, it's a natural process for the body to expel the egg that hasn't been fertilized. Mm-hmm. So the body knows that it wants to do that, but it took from Friday night until like Wednesday morning or something like that. It took this long time of pain, and there was nothing else I could do than kind of be in that process. And I think I was, in this sense, I wasn't open for any outside influence, and I was in a process of feeling into the purposelessness, feeling into the entropy, feeling into the predicament of being a human body, where I can't force creativity, where I can't force insight, where I am this vessel for involution, evolution that happens through me. But in that, there was also this kind of, the melancholy actually of it, which is very much what we have in those individual gates, where it feels like you are in your own process and you're kind of disconnected from the world. So I do believe there is something here with attitude that it's not that I'm saying I could have shifted attitude and suddenly everything would have been light. I actually don't believe that would have been the way of doing it. But I do see that with the attitude that I had, that's actually what could allow that process to go through. And I don't think that I'm completely out of it either. And in my case, I have Chiron, which we don't usually look at in human design, but we do in the gene keys, when we kind of start looking outside the profile. And we also can look at the asteroids. And I have Chiron in the 23 and Ceres, which is about nurturing this kind of mother, goddess of agriculture. It's my 23 and my 43. And this is also my mother's radiance and purpose. And, we know how I've spoken about before, being very connected to my mom and her with her physical issues that have to do with the purpose and the radiance, because that is the body. So for me there, and it's a first line for her, she's a 5-1. I know that there is a part of me that's grieving, what it is to be in a human body. At the same time, as always, when I'm in creativity, I'm the person who kind of brainwashes people about the body, saying that this vessel is the door to everything and to all the subtle layers. And I think that's sometimes in Scorpio, you have to go and even die to the things that you most live for. That's what, and then you don't even want to do the things that usually you're like, oh, I can shift attitude. No, I wanted to be in the entropy, and I knew that I needed to be there, and I couldn't force the blood. I couldn't force anything, and I had to be with the pain. So this is what I can feel with the Scorpio gates. And I think that sometimes, because it's coupled with that 34 that really well, John, and I have it twice. You know, sometimes we're too busy to allow the process its timing, and then the insight might not come because we're running away from it.
I love this share because you're directly speaking to one of the primary focuses of this gene key of 43, even though you're discussing your experience around the transit through the solar transit through the first gate. This process of involution that we're talking about, you know, we can talk all day long about involution, but as long as you're identified with your own body, with your own individuality, the only thing that you can experience is evolution. Because what happens to allow involution? You evolve. What happens once involution occurs within you, whether you've done anything to, you know, make yourself more receptive to it or not, you experience an evolution. That's how it moves through you. And one of the largest traps that we can fall into on this path of spiritual expansion, of inward contemplation even, is the connection that our ego is going to inevitably make with the desire or need to become greater, more expansive, more holy, more divine, more anything, whether that's more comfort in your security, more wealth in your status in society, more fulfillment in your relationships. And it sets up for us a relationship with our experiences of shadows that actually causes us to miss the entire gift, which in the case of this one is deafness. Deafness is a huge gift. And what you're describing about your experience with gate 1 is a willingness to not become deaf to the experience that was happening of this shadow discomfort level of experience, but to become deaf to the voice that says, I'm better than this. I'm more evolved than this. I'm bigger than this, and I shouldn't be feeling these. I should be doing the things, you know, I'm the world's biggest cheerleader for going deep into your body, you know, to transmute and transform the experiences of suffering. And what you were saying is, I'm going to go deaf to the voice that says I can't suffer. I'm going to experience it. And to me, what you're talking about is truly the insight, which is the gift of this gene key. The insight to understand how to create vibrational discernment. One of the things that's been coming up so much in these spiritual circles is this concept of discernment. And what is being referred to is a cognitive process where one makes a judgment about an experience, person, environment, or process, or another, and chooses the one which is going to generate the higher frequency result. And when we engage in this process, it might, depending on where we are on our evolutionary paths, provide massive improvements in our experience in terms of experiencing more of those positive internal emotions and experiences. Maybe that process of cognitive discernment can lead us into a higher experience. However, vibrational discernment is not a cognitive process. It is an aural process, an auditory process that happens within your vibrational self. And it's this experience that happens through you and in conjunction with your willingness to embrace what you are and where you are on your path. And that vibrational discernment is going to bring to you the experiences in your reality that are required for your integration of your own possibilities. And this is a form of insight that can allow you to move out of the process of avoiding your suffering and beginning to live alongside it without judgment. And when we do that move in our experience, what happens is insight blossoms within us. We begin to recognize what we can glean from the experiences of suffering or from the shadow experiences. And when we do that, we're moving into the stage of service. That's what this gene key is really about. Suffering, service, and surrender. I guess it's not suffering. Is it suffering? Is that the first stage, Bella? Am I making that up? Let me look that up real quick. So, Bella, I'm curious, based on what you've shared, how do you see deafness kind of being an ally for you as you're processing this experience? How can that integrate into what you've shared so far? I'm curious to know what you see or hear.
And I think that the word deafness is a little bit dangerous to use. So it is all about being intimately immersed in your own process with this integration circuitry together with individual circuitry. We are listening to the inner knowing. And I think that the things that I see with the 23, the programming partner, and the 43 is when they are deaf for the inner knowing. Like, I think that the truth here is that I was immersed in the process and I could see the wisdom, where I was put into the wisdom of the process, even if it was painful. And I didn't seek a solution on the outside. I did tell my mom actually that I was in pain, and she started to give me different kind of diagnoses that what it could be. But that's the deafness here, or the non-influence, that we can say, is to not listen to the outside, because actually when you start to do that, it becomes the shadow of the 23. It becomes much more complex. And that's what I could have, like, if there is an insight for me to have here, if I start to listen to the outside, then the shatter, like Richard Rudd actually says, deafness is not silence. Deafness is very, very loud, because there is so much that we might start to listen to and try to fix, instead of being intimately immersed in the process. So if we mean by deafness to cut off from the outside influence, that's what will allow you to be in the process and to follow the process and the cycle of the process until there might be, something opens up, something is shifting.
I'm glad you brought up that quality of noisiness that is inherent in this process, because I feel like as we're discussing this, whether it's the English language or it's simply the energy of this particular gene key, but like our speaking about it, it's such a such a fine line between where we're both pointing directly at something, but the misinterpretation of what we're describing can be pointing in the exact opposite direction of it in the other way. Yes, being deaf to the outer noise, or not listening, not being influenced by the noisiness that's happening around us, we could interpret that from a standpoint of inner noisiness and actually move deeper into a lower frequency experience by isolating ourselves from an outward projection, right? So, but what you're describing is a connection to that inner voice, which has this sort of like gentle, and it's not stillness exactly, but it has this quieter quality to it. And when we encounter people who want to give us advice, or all of the people that you can see on social media sharing opinions, or whatever it is, not being influenced by that doesn't mean that you're necessarily rejecting everything that you hear either. It simply means that you aren't allowing it to drown out that inner voice of knowingness that is leading you into an experience of fulfillment. Like talking about getting higher vibration is all the rage these days, but what are we really after? Fulfillment. And sometimes that means we have to engage with a lower vibrational experience, an experience of suffering. Strangely enough, that can be fulfilling for us, depending on what we need at our particular moment of evolution, or involution as it's happening.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because remember again that we're speaking about a highly individual gate that has to do with this process of individuation, how we come in deeper in our bodies and we become more unique, because that's what we're here to be. And I think that what we can see often on social media and everywhere, like people are giving you hacks, people are giving you insight. But if insight is something individual, then it comes actually from your inner voice. It's not something that comes from the outside. So that feels important. Insight is individual. And I think that this also goes very much into my mom, who did work for a long time with people. And she's a 5/1 and she has a 13 in her evolution. So she hears everything, and she often knows the insight for the client the first time. But as a 5/1 that is also easily projected on, she has learned that she has to sit there and wait until the insight, the penny drops for the client, because it's going to drop in a little bit of a different way than what she can express. She's going to know, she knows it already, but instead of like giving it to them the first time. And I can see that I have a problem with that, because when I work with somebody and I see something, I can't wait. The fourth line just wants to share the truth and and have you feel it. But many times people are not ready. So overwhelming people with your insight, when that is not always the best way to do it. And I can see as well how I'm learning, at least when I it's about my friends. I have a friend who has been in a relationship that isn't actually ideal for her. She sent me a screenshot yesterday that another friend of hers sent and said, I am your friend. I have to tell you this and this and this about your relationship. I cannot support this. And I feel as your friend, I have to tell you. She sent me that and she said, okay, I think that I'm coming closer to the closure of this relationship. And I had to say, I agree with what this person says. And these are the few things that I told you like months ago and that I saw, because I also have that 13 like my mom has. And the most important thing for me came at the bottom of the message is like, I allow you, I respect your process and I respect your choices. Mm-hmm. And that for me is important. There is no way for me to simplify her process 2023 or give her the insight 43, that needs to come in. That's her process. So we are not here to push anybody into evolution or involution or insight or simplicity. It's something that happens again from the inside. So that feels important for me here. This is not, again, something that you can rush. It comes, and it's an inner work. It's inner workings.
I think, what you're saying goes straight to, it really goes deeply into what we're experiencing as we are co-creating this way of engaging with the solar transit around the entire mandala, what lunar alchemy is really all about. And indeed, partly maybe, why contemplation was the vehicle for the transmission of the gene keys, because each of us is on such an individual journey. There's no way that another person can really, you can't do it for another. You can only do what you can do for yourself, and then allow that individual nature, which gives rise to that creative rebel that is the archetype of this particular gene key. Not a rebel in terms of a rebel of society, a rebel in terms of individual expression, meaning there's not another human being on the planet that can do it the way that you do it, or how you do it, or why you do it. And because of that, your essential nature is going to challenge the status quo that exists, because that status quo is this sort of massive field of compromises that's made between people to make this homogeneous agreement that none of these individuals perfectly resonate with. And so when we talk about, like, okay, what is the process for lunar alchemy, we are going to dive into what's at the root of each transit, and then offer a frequency transmission to assist in allowing for a deeper integration of our own process, so that individual expression can become reality. It can become a manifestation. The inner desire is not about causing your friend necessarily to fix her life and to improve her relationships or whatever it may be looked at. It sounds more like you have an insight about what allows for the greatest evolution, the greatest potential to be revealed on a pathway. And I think it's interesting that brings up that each of our individual paths sometimes involves expressing that insight. And the reason that this gene key is about being a rebel is because when you share that insight, those who are not ready to consider and to move in the direction of that truth are going to brand you in a particular way, whether that's and someone who's always interfering in my personal relationship business, or someone who, whatever the branding is, it doesn't really matter. But that's exactly what makes us a rebel, is by saying, like, wow, well, here it is. This is my individual expression. And I think there's, as we go around this entire mandala, of course, there are other gene keys that kind of reveal, okay, well, how can we color or shade our individual expression in different ways so that it is more accessible. Or I can't remember which gene key it is, but I remember one of the gene keys is about having tactfulness, right? And like how we share and stuff. There's all these qualities that bring our individuality in harmony with universality. But this idea of being of service, which is so needed in our world, this is to me the one where it's not always about being in perfect harmony with the way things are. This is the one where your individual rebel can come out and play. And I don't mean rebel for the sake of doing it differently. I mean rebel for the sake of being exactly what you are, rather than compromising for the status quo. I love this discussion, Bella. It's like really, it it just feels like it just feels like it's so full of insight. So, Bella, we have today is 11/11. We have this involution happening. We're in the first line of this gene key. We're looking at the shadow of deafness as it moves through the way of insight to the city of Epiphany. What can you share about this particular transit overall as it moves through its stages, at least in terms of what you expect?
I mean, I feel energy because it's kind of funny how when we look at the wheel, we are going to have the first gene key and the 14th gene key is the codon ring of fire. And in between, we have the 43 and the 34, and that is the codon ring of destiny. So in this codon ring of destiny, like sandwiched in between, we're going to have the 14, which is just pure energy, sacral energy. We call it the powerhouse in the 64 doors. But it's just sacral energy that can be used in a way in any direction, and hopefully in a direction that's serving us. And that's why it's the harmonic gate to gate number 2 in the G center, the magnetic monopole that we spoke about last week, and that in a way shower, the feminine intuition. So I feel like I think that we're going to feel more and more energy. There has been some entropy. There have been probably some death and rebirth and transformation here in Scorpio. We are coming closer to Sagittarius, which is also a fire sign. So I would say, yeah, track the energy. I think we are going to feel more energy soon. And the 14 is still an individual circuitry. So I would still stay faithful to my own process. That also feels important. The simplicity of your own process. And like I always say, go back to the body. And like what I had to do this week, go back to the body even when it hurts. Because that's where the secrets in our, not our destiny in that sense, but like as an incarnated human being, that's where we can learn the most of. I believe that we continue without this body. So the time we are here, and that's the 28th that we were in recently as well, it is to learn from this form and the not foreverness of it. That's what comes to me. So it's still a bit of this kind of Scorpio theme, I guess. It's intense to be in a human body. It's intense to have energy move through this body, whether it's energy in the form of insight or any kind of energy.
You're speaking directly to my personal experience over the previous several days. I mentioned that I had been actively, since last weekend, trying to understand how can I access a frequency transmission that can be of assistance for the creative, which, it's the first gene key. It's like it's the first hexagram in the I Ching. It's the beginning of absolutely everything. And in a way, it's also the ending of everything. And, last night, my desire to be of service to our solar members and get that transmission posted during the actual solar transit. Granted, it was at the 11th hour of the 6th line of the sun's movement through the first gate, but my body was like, you need to lie down and rest because things are not the way they should be. I was feeling under the weather, and I was feeling I didn't feel well. And this idea of being of service, when you look at it through that individual circuitry that you're talking about, it takes on an entirely new meaning in terms of how does service to the whole really occur, not through your own idea of what you think it will. It happens through this sort of embracing of the individuality of who you are and the process that you are in. So, I mean, even for a person who may be listening, if you're listening on Facebook, if you have been inspired to be a person who is in service to the whole, you want to be in service to the whole, but you haven't discovered yet a way to offer anything that you would think is special or unique or provides insight to someone else, that doesn't mean you aren't in a stage of being deeply in service. Your own inner work and your own inner process is in deep service to the whole. So I want to thank you for those of you on Facebook for joining us for our discussion, for engaging in your process of service. If you feel inspired to join us in these energetic transmissions with Lunar Alchemy, we've done a number of accessible, open, public transmissions on full moons and new moons, so that you can experience those. But you can join us by clicking on the link in the comments under the video there if you would like to be a part of the solar membership with us. So we'll look forward to seeing you in a future session.